We're talking about materialism, the idea that our mental life emerges from our physical brain. If you are listening closely, if you are thinking about this, I hope you acknowledge that this is an odd and unnatural view. I don't expect you to believe it, at least not at first. And in fact, for the most part, people are far more attracted to the doctrine called dualism. Dualism is an idea that's been found in just about every religion and every philosophy. It's made explicit in Plato, for instance. But I think the most thoughtful and articulate defender of dualism was the philosopher René Descartes. Descartes believed that animals were material things. He thought that the doctrine of materialism was correct about not human animals. But humans are different, Descartes argued. For humans there is a duality. We possess two sorts of things. We are composed of two sorts of things. We are in part material, but we are also in part spiritual, separate, mental, psychological, in some way that doesn't reduce to the material. He made two arguments for this, and they are both reasonably good arguments, at least cute, persuasive at his time, and have persuaded many people and continue to persuade many people. The first argument for non-material nature is that humans are capable of doing things that no machine, no material entity ever could. So it might surprise you to hear this, but Descartes in the 7th century was familiar with robots. He knew about the French Royal Gardens, which is like a 7th century Disneyland or Euro Disney, which had robots that react when you approach them or when you step on certain stones. For instance, you might approach Diana, and then Neptune will jump out from the bushes, holding a trident. This was done not with electricity, but with water. So Descartes knew about these robots, and Descartes asked, well, maybe we are such things. Maybe we're just machines responding to the environment. And he said that we can't be. He said maybe animals, non-human animals can be, but human behavior is far more complicated and variegated and subtle to be explained in such simple ways. We'll return to this point later on in the course when we talk about Noam Chomsky and Noam Chomsky's critique of behaviorism, which argued that basically humans respond in a relatively reflexive way to environmental stimuli. Descartes, along with Chomsky, said that can't be. Our behavior is far too complicated for that, so we can't be machines. His second argument is probably better now, and it's based on intuition. And his claim was we don't feel like bodies. So, to put it more technically, he applied what was called a method of doubt. He asked the question, what do we know for sure, and what can we question? So, for instance, you might believe you were born in such and so place. You could be wrong, you could be deceived. You might believe that the Earth is thousands or millions of years old, but maybe the Earth was created 100 years ago, and all the memories that your grandparents have of the past were just manufactured. You might believe, said Descartes, that you live in a world of things, that you are sitting on a chair, or there is a wall in front of you, or there is a computer near your hands. But Descartes observed that we often believe such things when we're in dreams, but weren't mistaken. He observed that people who are mentally ill or were deranged in some way might have such beliefs, but don't be mistaken. So you could be wrong that there's a physical world around you. You could be wrong that there is a body that you have. This is an ancient concept, of course, but it's best articulated in the movie The Matrix, which maintains that we think we're running around in the physical world, but actually, with the lucky exception of our heroes like Neo and Trinity, we're actually just plugged into some sort of system. Another version of this is that we're brains in a watt. If you were a brain, just a brain sitting in a watt with electrical wires stimulating your experience, you couldn't have. Maybe you are such things. Modern-day philosophers, for instance, will argue that there's an excellent chance that we are simulations. We computer simulations. So Descartes and people following Descartes said there's a lot we can't be sure of. The things that we are seemingly most confident about in real world can be shaken. But Descartes said there's one thing you can doubt. You can doubt your own consciousness. You can doubt your own existence. The famous line is, I think therefore I am, and spelling out this intuition, building from the fact you could doubt that you have a body, but you can't doubt that you have a mind. To God's word, I knew that I was a substance, the world essence or nature, of which is to think, and that for its existence there is no need of any place, nor does it dependent in the material thing, that is to say, the soul by which I am, that I am, is entirely distinct from body. So that's a philosophical key for dualism. But as I said, dualism is also emerged out of common sense. Think about how you describe your body. You describe your bodies if you possess it. My arm, my heart, my body, my brain, as if it's something separate from you that you have. Or consider your intuitions about personal identity. So typically, as people age, their consciousness follows their body. So I get 10 years older, my mind 10 years older, my brain is 10 years older, it all connects together. But we easily accept at least infection that people can hop from one body to another. There are many comedies that involve body switching, body swaps. There are moves that involve somebody going to sleep one morning as one person and waking up as another. We understand they are fiction, they aren't real, but they make sense to us. There's an intuitive rationale to this. We don't walk out of the theory and say, I'm totally confused what happens there. Rather, at least with our naive conception of the self, we accept at least of the possibility that you can hop from one body to another. None of this is limited to modern day movies. The most famous short story of history by Franz Kafka begins with a sentence. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Metamorphosis involves that transformation, and long before that eludes the characters and transformed. Some of the characters are transformed by an evil witch into pigs. It's none of you took to people and turned them into pigs. Rather, it's much worse. They put them in the body of pigs. As the passage goes, they had the head and voice and bristles and body of swine, but their minds remained unchanged as before. So we there, penance there, weeping. Our conception that bodies and cells are separate allows us to accept idea you had many people inhabiting one body. This is how many people think about multiple personality disorder, something we'll get to cute later on the course. It's also at the root of a view that many people, both religious and non-religious, hold, which is the idea of demonic possession. Your body can be taken over by somebody else. Another manifestation of dualism is you could believe in intelligent beings without bodies. If mind and body are separated races, the possibility you could have one without the other. Plainly, you got to have bodies without minds. That's what a corpse is. But the argument, because you could also have minds without bodies. This is, for instance, what many people think about gods or angels, which are the immaterial beings that can think, that can observe, that can act, but they don't have physical bodies in the same sense that we do. Finally, and maybe most important for people, the idea that of dualism, the idea you are not your physical body, raises what must be for many an incredibly appealing consequence, which is that you can survive the destruction of the body. In fact, if you ask most people, religious and non-religious, what will happen after your body is destroyed, the answer is not, well, I'm dead then, that's it. It's the end of things, but rather the belief is that you can live on. Maybe you'll end up in some spirit world. Maybe you will ascend to heaven if you're unlucky. Maybe you'll descend to hell. Maybe you'll occupy some other body as an reincarnation. But the idea is that the destruction of your body need not be the destruction of you, because you are not your body. All of these beliefs, the beliefs about personal identity, the beliefs about life after death, about the existence of supernatural beings, about God, all rest at least to some extent on a dualist perspective. So materialism, which says dualism is just plain wrong, is an audacious view and should be treated as such. You shouldn't just shrug and write it down. You should grapple with it. You should worry about it. You should either be grudgingly accept it or fight against it. So why are modern-day psychologists and neuroscientists so confident that dualism is mistaken? Well, there are a few problems with it. One is that it simply doesn't help us explain certain things that need to be explained. Appealing to an immaterial world, to an immaterial soul seems to talk certain questions that really do deserve an answer. So throughout this course, we'll ask questions like, how do we learn language? What do we find sexually attractive? How does memory work? These are questions about ourselves, about our minds. To say, oh, it all happens some immaterial realm, leaves us hopeless when it comes to answering them. The second concern is that at the time, Descartes was correct to infer from the limitations of material things, physical things, that we probably are not physical things. But by now we have a much better understanding what physical things can do, which makes it entirely possible for many of us that we are such things. So I am thinking, for instance, of computers and robots. For Descartes, the idea that a physical thing can do something as complicated as play a game of chess would seem ludicrous. But now, of course, we know that physical things, and if you are looking at a computer, you are looking at such a physical thing, can do exactly that. They can understand language. They could recognize objects. They could store things in memory. They can make inferences, and so on. Now, for some of these things, they don't do it anywhere near as well as people do. So when we talk about language development, for instance, we see that a 2-year-old child uses and understands language better than any computer around. So we need to bear that in mind. But still, it's no longer not to say that physical things can do all of the rich and psychologically diverse and psychologically complicated things that people do. Which means that we have to take seriously the claim that we are in fact such physical things. The final consideration is that there is tremendous evidence that the brain is in fact the root of mental life. So, put aside all that philosophical abstract arguments, there is just tons of direct evidence. To some extent, the direct evidence has always been there. You don't have to be born in the 20th or 21st century to appreciate that getting hit in the head could affect your consciousness and your memory. To appreciate that diseases like syphilis can lead to disruption of the will and of consciousness. Alzheimer's can rob you of your rationality. That coffee and alcohol can inflame the passions. It just is so evident in everyday life that physical events that affect the brain can affect ourselves, suggesting that at very least our mental life is ultimately connected to the brain. Our recent years, something else has happened, which is we've developed technologies that allow us to look directly into the brain, look at the brain's activation, and infer from pattern of the brain activation what people are thinking. So very crudely, you can put somebody into a scanner, an fMRI scanner, and you could tell whether or not are thinking about language or music or sex. The technology is increasing. There is such a point that is not implausible that for some of you, by the time you are listening to this, we can put a sleeping person under fMRI scanner. And now, from neural patterns of neural feelings, now what we're dreaming. All of this, I think it is very difficult to keep this in mind and hold onto the view of dualism. I think materialism, however uncomfortable, however unpalatable, is a view that the science forces us to adopt.